Welcome everybody to the cyberbullying panel discussion. This is the third panel discussion in the field of respect and safety that we've had here at Carleton over the last couple of years. This one specifically is looking at cyberbullying. This morning's session that we had, we targeted to students, to have students focus in and see what their thoughts were. So this one we've directed more at staff, so if there's any students here, please, you're welcome anyway. Thank you for attending. Just to let everyone know that the session is being recorded, so it means you're all going to be on camera, but from the back. We're there from the front. And it'll be posted on the Environmental Health and Safety webpage, where we have all of the video recordings from the previous two panel discussions and all of the various resources and information. The presentations that are going to be used today will also appear in the next day or so on the webpage, so you'll be able to access them there, as well as the resource sheets that you will find. Okay, now we're finding I've got some connection issues with my computer. What we were having previously was everybody to send any emails to Respect and Safety. That's an email that we created in 2011 that people can write in and ask for advice, ask for issues, and then I triage them. They come in through my office, and I'm the only one that accesses those. At the moment, I can't get into my computer, so I'm asking if you have any questions during the session, please send them to my own email at nancy.delcellier@carleton.ca, and that way I'll have questions for you and our panelists, so we'll pose them to our panelists at the end of the session. Just to give you an idea of the format for today's session, what we have is we have an open panel. Each of them are going to speak in turn. Tina Daniels is our first speaker. Tina is an associate professor and associate chair in the Department of Psychology. She's an expert in bullying and aggression. She's been studying conflict and aggression for the last 30 years. She's developed, implemented, and evaluated conflict resolution programs, social skills training programs, peer mediation programs, and anti-bullying programs, both locally and internationally. 13 years ago, Tina established and chaired the Ottawa Anti-Bullying Coalition, a group of more than 50 community members committed to eliminating bullying. She's a longtime member of the Promoting Relationships and Eliminating Violence Network, which is a national network of leading researchers and organizations. It's the first of its kind in this country and a world leader in bullying prevention. In 2012, she addressed the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights regarding the issue of cyberbullying in Canada, which led to the document, Cyberbullying Hurts: Respect for Rights in the Digital Age. This makes recommendations for how Canada can move forward with a coordinated national strategy to address cyberbullying. In conjunction with Girl Guides of Canada, she has developed a nationwide intervention program to address the use of social aggression within girls' groups. She's recently been part of a national evaluation of the Canadian Bullying Prevention Program, which received the CIHR, that's the Canadian Institute for Health Research, Community Partnership Award for 2013. Currently, she's focusing on the task of changing our social milieu by building skills that are incompatible with bullying, that will modify students' behavior, that will empower victims of bullying, both face-to-face and online, to report problems, and that will build a social climate that is unaccepting of such behavior. Thank you, and let me welcome Dr. Tina Daniels. Our next speaker is going to be Robert Monti, who is in-house counsel and Director of Labor and Employee Relations and Compliance with Human Resources here at Carleton. Robert has practiced employment and labor law in the Ottawa area since his call to the bar in 1993. Most recently, at one of Ottawa's most prominent employment law firms, Nelligan O'Brien Payne, where he was a partner and practice group leader of the Employment Practice Group. Robert has handled a wide variety of litigation matters before the courts and arbitration boards. These include the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, the Ontario Divisional Court, and the Court of Appeal, the Ontario Labour Relations Board, and the Canada Industrial Relations Board. Robert is a frequent speaker, writer, and lecturer on employment and labor issues and taught the employment law course at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law, from 2006 to 2011. Robert is a Carleton graduate, and he graduated in 1988 with a Bachelor in Journalism, combined honors with law. He credits this with providing the necessary foundation to enable him to build a successful practice in the fields of employment and labor law. Help me to welcome Robert. Last and certainly not least is Jacques Charron, our Manager of Workplace Relations and Case Management from the Department of Human Resources. As the Manager of Workplace Relations and Case Management, Jacques is responsible for facilitation, mediation, and engaging in workplace solutions that meet the requirements of the university's policy on the prevention and resolution of harassment and violence. Jacques is also responsible for providing consultation, advice, guidance, and coaching on a wide range of complex issues, including workplace conflicts, attendance management, return to work, medical accommodations, sick leave, long-term disability, and WSIB. Help me to welcome Jacques among us. And just to let you know who I am, I'm Nancy Delcellier. I'm the Director of Environmental Health and Safety here at Carleton. And we put together and manage the workplace violence and harassment programs and policies. So we wanted to be here as part of it, and we couldn't all fit all of us talking at the same time, so I just get to do the intros. We're only part of the solution and part of the work and part of the efforts that go into maintaining a safe and healthy workplace free of violence and harassment on campus. We've got representatives with us here from the Privacy Office, from Equity, from Department of University Safety, from ITS. I keep wanting to say CCS. I keep working on that one. And this morning we had Jen Sugar with us from the Director of Student Affairs, because there are times where things cross over, whether it's a student or if it's a staff issue. So we wanted to bring everybody together. And of course, we do work quite a bit with the various unions, and I know there's some union leaders here with us today. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing the presentations. As I said, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to my email, and that way I'll be able to read them as we go through. Thank you very much. Dr. Daniels.
So I'm pleased to be here today. It's very nice to be speaking in my home. Usually I'm out in elementary schools or in community settings, so it's very nice to be here and to be able to talk to you about cyberbullying. So I wanted to start off by talking about what exactly is bullying before we move to cyberbullying. And bullying is defined as meeting three requirements. It is the intent to cause harm, but beyond that, it is to be not a single act, but repeated, persistent, and continuous hurtful behavior. Where there is a perceived power imbalance, where the person who's perpetrating the behavior is perceived to have more power than the individual who's being targeted, and where the target feels inferior, whether or not there actually is an imbalance. Bullying can occur anywhere and at any age. I see 3-year-olds who bully, and I see adults who bully. It can occur at home, at school. Certainly when I'm in the schools talking to children, they'll tell me that their brother or their sister is bullying them. We do know that children who bully socially when they go to school have mothers who are more likely to engage in those kind of behaviors. And bullying also moves into the workplace. When we think about bullying, sometimes I think that we think it's some really big, major act. We see a lot of those kinds of things on the media. But in fact, bullying starts out as very small, insidious acts that escalate over time. And I think this quote describes it very well. Bullying rarely begins with a bang. It tends to be a subtle process of intimidation and criticism, rather than erupting in a single event. As the weeks and months go by, the bullying not only continues, but gradually intensifies to the point of being relentless. And I think that that's a really important thing to recognize, because a lot of people are really reticent to talk about bullying in the early stages. And in the early stages, when it is small, insidious things, it's much easier problem to address and to get resolution around, in contrast to when things have really escalated and become hugely problematic. A lot of times people feel that The best strategy is just to wait and to try and ignore bullying when it's happening and hope that it will go away. And certainly when we look at coping strategies for handling bullying, whether it's in school or in the workplace, we see that a lot of people engage in what we call wishful thinking coping, which is just keeping your head down and hoping it's going to go away. Unfortunately, bullying by definition escalates over time unless something happens to actually stop the process. And so that's why it's really important that we recognize what bullying is and that we move to intervene early in the process. I always say by the time I get called into a school, things are always in very deep disarray, and where there are long-standing histories of conflict, which are very hard and difficult to intervene with. A lot of people wonder about why individuals might engage in bullying behavior, and there's been lots of research that's really looked at that. And it appears that the major reasons that people engage in bullying behavior is for the response from the other people in their environment. And in particular, they're looking for power, status, and control. And most individuals who engage in bullying behavior get that kind of response from those who are not targeted, but who are in the environment. We know that in high schools and elementary schools, for example, that youth will rate people who engage in bullying behaviors more positively than they will people who are targeted. They are reticent to say anything negative to those people for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about later. But that is the biggest underlying motivation for the use of bullying behavior, and that's what sustains and maintains those types of behaviors. If you take away the power, the control, and the status that are afforded to individuals by the peer group, those behaviors will decrease because there's no payoff anymore. So we've talked about bullying in general, but what about workplace bullying? What does workplace bullying look like? Well, that's any behavior that humiliates or intimidates. And when I talk about bullying, I'll say any behavior with the intent to cause harm. And we used to think in the old days about physical bullies getting hit or punched or kicked. But these days we focus much more on what I would call social or relational bullies, where the focus is to hurt or harm an individual's social relations, their self-esteem, or their position within the group. Could include verbal aggression, name-calling, more physical things like vandalizing a person's belonging or sabotaging their work. More of the relationship bullying, spreading malicious rumors, leaving people out on purpose, exclusion. Humiliating, initiating practices like hazing. Some of those things more occur in military settings, for example. Personal attacks, aggressive and threatening gestures, and cyberbullying. And cyberbullying is something that does occur frequently in the workplace. It can come from coworkers, supervisors, employers, and in the university setting from students as well. Cyberbullying in the workplace has been referred to in the literature as the silent epidemic. About 35% of American adults report bullying behavior at work. And what's interesting to me is in elementary schools and in high schools, the rate of bullying is about 30%. If you ask children at any point in time when they, if they have been bullied, seen bullying or being bullied since school started in the fall, about 30% will report that same behavior. And it's not too surprising that schoolyard bullies grow up, they move into the workplace, and if those behaviors, if they've been using them and they've been working for them since early childhood, it's likely that they'll continue to use those behaviors in the workplace. So now cyberbullying. What is it, and is it different from bullying face-to-face? There's been a lot of discussion in the literature and a lot of research looking at cyberbullying, and lots of debate about whether it is or is not the same as face-to-face, or what I might call traditional bullying. Cyberbullying is defined as the willful and repeated harm inflicted on or through the use of electronic devices. So there we're talking about using emails, texts, web posts, other forms of technology to transmit the hurt. Cyberbullying is much more like what I would call social or relationship bullying than, although you can have a physical threat via technology, most of the cyberbullying that occurs in the workplace would be of the social or relationship type of bullying, where the intent is to harm the person's relationships, their status within their office, their relationships with others, and their self-esteem. It is as common in the workplace as conventional bullying, and it may be even more so as time goes on. And I'll talk about some of those differences, but one of the things about cyberbullying is that it tends to be used a lot because it's a bit more covert and hidden than face-to-face or traditional bullying. And people will say and do things on the internet that they might not do face-to-face. So if we look at the kinds of behaviors that cyberbullying in the workplace might entail, that's the use of the internet to harass, threaten, or maliciously embarrass by sending unsolicited or threatening emails, by encouraging others to do the same, by overwhelming an individual with emails or text messages, just blasting them with hurtful messages, spreading rumors online, making derogatory comments in discussion groups, sending negative messages directly to the individual, impersonating an individual online and engaging in negative behavior that would reflect badly on them, sending inflammatory, controversial, or enticing messages which cause others to respond negatively to the individual. So much of cyberbullying, the intent is to harm the individual's social relationships. And so rather than harming the individual's physical body, the intent is to harm their relationships in their workplace. Harassing an individual during a live chat, leaving abusive messages on a website, sending the individual material that's knowingly offensive, or creating a web page or entering an entry on a blog that depicts an individual in negative ways. So just all share the same thing, the intent to cause harm, but through the use of electronic means. So our question, is cyberbullying different or the same as real-life, face-to-face traditional bullying? How many people would say they think that cyberbullying is different? Okay, how many people think that it's the same as regular bullying? And some people are like, oh, I don't really know. Well, it's a trick question, so you're both right. Cyberbullying is in many ways not different from face-to-face bullying. If I look at the kinds of behaviors that are actually people are engaging in, it meets the three aspects of the definition of bullying. The intent to cause harm, occurring repeatedly over time, where there's a power difference. So in that sense, it's just a different modality to engage in the exact same behaviors. It's still about power and control and status. There's nothing different there. The underlying motivations are the same. It does, however, differ in several ways from face-to-face bullying. One of the points that people who are the targets of cyberbullying point out is that it's 24/7. You are inundated with messages all day, and even when you go home, those continue to come into your home. And I was asking the students this morning, you know, how many people have their phone in their bedroom at night? How many people answer text messages in the middle of the night? I know I'm as addicted to technology as my students are. I always have my phone on. If there's a text in the night, I'm always thinking it's an emergency of some sort, but there's no turning it off. It's a little bit different than being in a workplace setting where someone is harassing you face to face, but when you go home, you can relax and kind of breathe a sigh of relief. So there's no real safe haven for escape. It's also been reported that cyberbullying, individuals who engage in cyberbullying behaviors will be significantly more hurtful and harmful than they would be face to face. And also victims report that it is more hurtful and harmful than face-to-face. And there are a number of reasons for that. To start with, it's more hurtful and harmful because there are many more bystanders. If someone says something crappy to you at the office and two other people are standing listening, two other people know. When someone says something to you on Facebook, and if it's public, then everybody who accesses the Facebook page will know. That also leads to individuals reliving the experience over and over and over. So with cyberbullying, there's much more re-victimization in the sense that every time the post comes by, or every time someone shares the post and it's picked up and transmitted to someone else, the individual goes through that experience again. There's also no way to pull back the comment or the photo. It remains out there, and again leads to re-victimization. So we've had some very high-profile incidents with youth in Canada, Amanda Todd's, Rita Parsons, where that was what really upset them the most, was that inability to ever bring it back. So it was a bad judgment. Amanda Todd's took a provocative picture. She sent it to a man on the internet who had been encouraging her to do so, who she thought she had a relationship with, and he then put it out into the public domain. And so then it was every time then the football players at school saw it, every time other people saw it, she was re-victimized. Wallace has talked about something that he calls the chilly internet effect, and says that by removing social cues, it allows internet communication to be more free and behavior to be less inhibited. And that's because with email, there's a lack of nonverbal information, and the quality of the verbal information is sometimes ambiguous. So I don't know about you, but I know when I first started sending emails in person, I can be quite sarcastic. But when I started writing emails, I realized that there's no way to indicate sarcasm in an email, and that it would be taken like seriously in a negative way. So I had to stop being sarcastic in email. I'm also the queen of the emoji because I'm a social developmental psychologist. I study social emotional learning in children, and I feel that anything that I write in text, people should have some context. So I'm always debating with my daughter, which is the happiest emoji? You know, is that a sad face or is that a cranky face? Like, I wish they gave descriptions with each of the emojis, so I would be sure I had the right emotional tenor to my email. So that's missing in email. So sometimes you'll get an email and you'll take it a really negative way, and then you'll talk to someone and they're like, oh, I was just really rushing. And I'm often doing that. I write emails frequently on my phone when I'm rushing places. And recently I got an email from someone and it said, I'm really sorry about the email that I sent you yesterday. I realized when I reread it that the tone was not the best, and it was a complaint about, I don't know, TA or something. And I thought it was really interesting because I hadn't really taken it as a negative tone. But when the person thought back and reread it, they're like, oh, maybe that was a little bit harsher than I had originally intended. Another thing that's very difficult to do is to call back those emails. Have you ever had to send out an email that says, disregard the email I just sent? But of course, everybody's already read it, so you can't really disregard it. There are also, individuals say there's an absence of authority cues. When you're on the internet, there's really nobody monitoring, and there's kind of a sense that, you know, there's no internet police. You can pretty much put a lot of stuff out there. They're getting better at being willing to take things down, but for a long time, the argument was freedom of speech. We can put anything out on the internet that we want. That's our right. Others have argued it creates a de-individualization effect, which reduces people's concern about their own behavior and leads to actions that are more unrestrained and disinhibited. So the online environment can enhance social power as a result of shared norms. If everybody else is agreeing with what you're saying and is passing it on and sharing it, then you have enhanced social power, and that can enhance the victim's powerlessness. So in that sense, cyberbullying is different from face-to-face bullying in that it is more hurtful and harmful. It has more harmful effects for the individual, and it is very difficult to escape from. So how much does cyberbullying happen in the workplace? Well, this is a study of Canadian academics done by McKay and colleagues in 2008, and also this statistic is from Coyne and Sprigg in 2012. They said their study of workplace harassment found that 8 in 10 office workers had experienced cyberbullying behaviors on at least one occasion in the previous 6 months. So that's quite a lot. The Canadian study of academics by McKay found that they looked to see who was initiating inappropriate behavior in a Canadian academic setting, and found that about 64% of the inappropriate behaviors were by peers, so people of equal status. So those would be like your work colleagues. About 45% of inappropriate behaviors were from persons with power over you, so that might be your supervisor or your boss, and about 27% from students. About 50% of the respondents said that most of the inappropriate behavior was through email. And the more I read about cyberbullying in the workplace, it appears that email is a really big issue and very problematic, and that's where a lot of office issues arise. 36% said it occurred in an office or workspace when alone with a potential individual who's engaging in bullying behavior. And 23% reported experiencing inappropriate bullying, harassment type behaviors in the classroom. 44% said the most severe forms of bullying take place through email. So we need to really think about email and when we send email and what we write in email, and we really don't have any kind of a course or any instruction on writing email. My husband, who teaches at Algonquin College in technology and has been exposed to technology much longer than I have, he always says to me, you know, when you want to write that email and you're just all fired up, and he's like, okay, put it in the folder for 24 hours and then read it again and see, do you really want to send that? And sometimes I see come across my desk an email and I'll think, oh, I can't believe they put that in writing. That really was bad judgment to push send. Okay, so that's one of the things I would really encourage people when we're talking about cyberbullying in the workplace is just be really careful about what you commit to email. Once it's out there, you can't take it back. You know, if you write a crappy email and send it, and then you sending the email that says, you know, please, I'm recalling it, that doesn't really work very well. A study of Canadian universities conducted by Simon Fraser University in 2014 interviewed 269 faculty across 4 Canadian universities, and they found that faculty reported cyberbullying by their colleagues somewhere between 9 and 18%, depending on the university, and cyberbullying by students between about 5 and 32%. The cyberbullying by students involved email, course sites like See You Learn, Rate My Professor, and I was talking about that earlier today. If you're a professor like I am, you're just heartbroken if you look at Rate My Professor. I'll tell news faculty, don't look at Rate My Professor. Rate My Professor's gotten much more sensitive, and they are willing to take down now harassment type postings, but that can be very demoralizing. Most of the cyberbullying by students were known to the faculty member. For cyberbullying by colleagues, it was all email. And that probably reflects our familiarity with technology. Youth, students are using a broader array of technology than faculty are. This is an American study by Coyne and Sprigg. They reported that 14 to 20% of people had been humiliated, ignored, or gossiped about online on at least a weekly basis. So that's quite harassing and quite demoralizing for someone who's having it happen, which is a similar rate to conventional face-to-face bullying. Those who actually experienced cyberbullying reported higher mental strain and lower job satisfaction than those who didn't. And the effect was significantly worse for those who were cyberbullied than for those who were harassed or bullied in the office in the more traditional way. What employees witnessed in terms of cyberbullying behavior were not taking people's concerns seriously, ignoring or overlooking people's contributions, sending gossip or malicious rumors out, or making belittling remarks about an individual. The most frequent behaviors engaged in by students directed towards faculty was purposefully interrupting class to distract the class, communicating a lack of respect, challenging authority, gossip and rumors again, and unprofessional remarks. There are 5 major reasons that workplace bullying is on the rise. One is that people don't talk about it. People are reticent to talk about it. I think that it's something that people feel is very personal and often very upsetting. Cyberbullying and bullying behavior is often part of the business culture or the university culture or your office culture. In fact, we know that research has shown that whether bullying type behaviors occur frequently or not is a function of the climate, of the work climate, rather than characteristics of the individual. So that really gets to what I call normative beliefs. So that's how much people think it's okay to engage in those kind of behaviors. If you get a clear message in your office, from everybody in your office, that it's not okay to do that, it's significantly more likely that people will hesitate to engage in those behaviors. Often employees don't recognize the early signs of bullying behavior, whether it's cyber or traditional. So I remember talking in a high school to a young woman who said, oh, I couldn't tell my principal that I'm being bullied by people throwing little bits of paper at me. And in fact, what was happening was people were making little spitballs and flicking them at her every day. And the principal was in the room, and I thought, to give him credit, he stood up and said, you know, if someone told me that someone had been throwing pieces of paper at them every day for the last 23 days, I would know there was a problem. And that's, I think, really a hard idea that we need to think about, is we get this idea that bullying are really big kind of acts, and that it's not bullying if it's not a really big act. And certainly we'll hear adults say, you know, that's not that big a deal, when in fact it really is a big deal, and much easier to intervene when it's small things, when it's first starting out, than once there's a long entrenched history of conflict. So we do want to be sensitized to those initial efforts to target someone. In many places there is no designated channel for reporting bullying, or people are just not aware of how they can go about addressing the issue, and that's why we have Robert and the others here today. They'll be able to tell you about the appropriate channels to get help at Carleton. And I think the other thing we were talking about at lunch that had come up this morning was that a lot of times people feel if they don't engage in a formal process, then they shouldn't do anything at all. And in fact, there are lots of informal channels, and many times people are much more satisfied with the resolution from an informal process than engaging in a more formal, and that's always a good place to start. And unfortunately, many employees feel like they have to tolerate bullying in order to have a job. Okay, so that is something that hopefully is changing, and I know that that's particularly the case when I was talking to students this morning. They feel very vulnerable. They're in positions of less power to begin with. They're young, they're inexperienced, and they don't have a lot of past experience to draw from on what is and is not okay in the workplace, but it can also be a problem as you get older as well. Now I want to talk about the impact of cyberbullying in the workplace and how it affects the individual who are targeted and also the people who are witnessing the behaviors. Cyberbullying is more hidden in the workplace, and it impacts on the individuals in a more serious way than traditional bullying. So to talk about that, I want to talk a little bit more about how bullying transpires, bullying behavior, whether it's cyber or traditional face-to-face. In my field, we talk about bullying as a relationship problem. And I think many people, when we first start talking about bullying, we think about it as just two people, a bully and a victim in the corner someplace duking it out. That's kind of the old traditional thought about bullying. I try to stay away from the terms victim and bully. We try not to use those terms in the field anymore because they're very attributional. It makes it sound like they're a bully and nothing else. Certainly because I work with many times with young children who are trying out some behaviors that they've seen work for other people, and whether they'll continue to use those behaviors or not as a habitual way of interacting with others really depends on the immediate response of the environment. If they get a really clear message the first time they try the behavior that, hey, that's not okay, we don't do that here, then they're likely not to use those behaviors again. For other people, they've been using these behaviors for a long time, they work for them, they're getting the effect they want, and they'll continue to use those behaviors unless the environment, milieu is changed so that they're not supportive of such things. So I like to say bullying takes place in the theater of the peer group, or in the theater of your colleagues, the people that you spend time with every day. It occurs when the environment supports the behavior. So when the normative belief in your work environment is that it's okay to send crappy emails, then people will send crappy emails. If it's not okay and other people, the people who are surrounding the incident say, hey, that's not okay, we don't do that here, then the likelihood of those behaviors occurring will decline significantly. We know that about 85% of the time when bullying behaviors occur, there are other people present. Often there are many other people present. And whether the behavior continues or not depends on what those people do. One of the things about cyberbullying is it has a built-in audience and has a really big audience and a lot of opportunity to get a lot of positive support from that audience. So when I think about bullying behaviors, whether they're cyber or not, I think about the perpetrator, the person who's perpetrating the behaviors, the person who's the target of those behaviors, but most importantly, I think about the bystanders, because they are the most important people in this situation, because they're the ones who can lead to the increase in the behavior or to the decrease in behavior. They're what are referred to often as the silent witnesses, those who seemingly only stand and watch. And I remember being in a high school once where a young woman said to me, "Lady, no offense to you, but why should I care? It's not happening to me." Okay, that is the kind of environment that supports bullying behavior. And of course, it's very hard to hear a young woman say that. In my field, we study that a lot. It's called moral disengagement. It's when you become desensitized to negative behaviors and you just go, you know, that's the kind of the lay of the land. It's not impacting me. Silent witnesses don't say anything, they don't do anything, they rarely speak out, but they're almost always aware of what's happening, and they leave the person who's being targeted to manage on their own. And this leads to an unintentional tolerance and support of aggression and bullying in your work environment. So why do people who know what's happening and that horrific things are happening to other people do nothing? Well, you know what? Adults do nothing for the very same reasons that children do nothing. These are exactly the same reasons. They say they don't know what to say or do. They don't want to make the situation worse, and they're fearful that they will make the situation worse. But if you recall, what did I tell you about bullying at the very beginning? By definition, it absolutely will get worse unless someone does something. So no matter how bad your intervention is, it's better than doing nothing at all. And in fact, when people intervene, they don't have to do very much. It's not a big, complicated kind of thing. If you say, hey, that's not okay, we don't do that here, that can often just shut things down very quickly. They don't want to be identified as a snitch or a rat, and they don't want to be the next target. Okay, the exact same reasons that kids talk about. Christina Semivalli, one of the world's leading experts on bullying, who is in Finland, who's developed a whole countrywide anti-bullying program. They have the lowest rates of bullying in the world right now. She says that bystanders are trapped in a social dilemma. They know bullying's wrong, and they even wish they could do something to stop it, but they're also acutely aware of their need for security and safety in their peer group. So the only time bystanders are going to actually do something is when the environment is safe to do something. And that's something that's really important. When we talk about workplace bullying and behavior, I always say to everyone, the most important thing is you have to keep yourself safe. Okay, so if you're in an environment that it's not safe to speak out, then you need to be talking to your other people that you work with about how to make that environment safer so that it is all right to speak out. So unfortunately, by inaction, bystanders reinforce bullying behavior and threaten the victim's need to belong in the peer group. And I was telling people this morning, when I established the Ottawa Anti-Bullying Coalition 13 years ago, people were not really talking much about bullying. It was a very new kind of thing. And I met a lot of people who had been really seriously harmed by bullying behavior, usually in their childhoods. They were adults now, but they often didn't hold down jobs. They didn't have relationships. They weren't married. They didn't have children. They were very isolated, very alone. But they were very highly motivated to make sure that what happened to them didn't happen to anyone else. And so when they saw the coalition being established, they wanted to do something, and they came out and they spent a lot of time talking to me. So I always say I've met and talked with many people who were the victims of really serious, very harsh bullying behavior that seriously impacted their lives. And I always say, not one of them ever said to me, I wish the person who bullied me had been punished more. But what every single person said was, I wish someone had said what was happening to me was not okay. Because nobody said anything, I thought that everybody agreed that I deserved what I got. And that's what happens with bullying behavior. Often what happens is people internalize it. They start to think that, okay, there's something the matter with me. I remember being in a school auditorium once where this adorable little grade 4 girl waited till 500 kids have left the auditorium. Then she rushed up to me and she said, okay, just tell me what I'm doing wrong. Is it my hair? Is it my clothes? Is it the way I talk? Because whatever it is, I'll change it. Unfortunately, she was an adorable little grade 4 girl. There was nothing about her that she could change that would change the bullying behavior. What needed to change was the environment that was supporting those behaviors. And we were on a red herring for a very long time in the field of bullying, where we tried to find the characteristics of victims. And I'll tell you, it's not the little red-haired kids with glasses. There is no kind of characteristic victimized individual. You just can't do it. We've tried personality attributes. People spent a lot of time. It was a red herring because that's not what bullying is about. It's not about the characteristics of those who have been targeted. So bystanders can have the biggest effect. When people around them speak up, targets get affirmed by their community. And interestingly, Christina Samavelli, who I just talked to you about, has found that that can actually negate the effects of victimization. So people who are victimized and have somebody who speaks up and says, hey, I saw what happened to you, I don't agree with it, I don't think it's okay, they don't show the serious mental health issues that victims have who do not have a defender or a supporter. And I put this little cartoon in because I thought that it's very, it makes, you think, of course, when you read it in this context, not sure if I should help that lady that's getting robbed or just wait for someone else to stop it. Okay, if you saw someone being robbed, last night as I was pulling into my driveway, I saw an older woman fall down on the street. People came from all over to help her. But when people hear or know about cyberbullying, everybody's like, keep your head down, don't let on, it might be you next. So we really need to think about how we approach cyberbullying. If no one speaks out, they internalize the abuse, they start an internal dialogue that is harmful. There must be something wrong with me, I must be deserving of what I got, and if no one speaks out, this can escalate and lead to suicidal ideation and acts of suicide. I love this quote. It's by a professor, Aaron Schatt, who is at McMaster University in the Department of Human Resources Management. He says, there's a tendency to let little stuff slip, but it's that little stuff that is what bullying is about. It's that accumulation of small aggressions, small put-downs, small humiliations. When that stuff takes place daily or multiple times a day over a period of time, that's really what bullying is. And cyberbullying is exactly the same. So we really need to think about in our own workplace, when we see those small, little insidious things happening, that we act, and we don't wait for it to get to be really big, a really big problem. If one person speaks out, this can negate the negative impact of bullying behavior. I want to talk briefly about impact and where impact of cyberbullying in the workplace can occur. So there is the impact on the workplace itself. Cyberbullying in the workplace disrupts the work environment. It impacts worker morale. It's not nice to work in a place where there's a lot of negative affect and harassment. It reduces productivity, creates a hostile work environment, and promotes absenteeism. Individuals who are targeted don't want to go to work, and a long time ago, I saw that the federal government had funded a study of the relationship between literacy and bullying. And I thought, what a waste of a lot of money. But actually, there's a very strong relationship between literacy and cyberbullying and bullying in general. And the reason for that is kids who are highly bullied don't go to school. And if you don't go to school, you can't learn to read and write. And so I thought that that really made me stop and think. It impacts on worker compensation claims. It increases use of sick leave and health care claims. Staff turnover is very high for individuals who've been targeted in the workplace. It's about 40%. There's an erosion of employee loyalty and commitment. There's the additional cost to recruit and train new employees. If 40% of your employees are leaving, you've got to find new people to take that place. It develops a poor public image and negative publicity, so then people may not want to come to work to be hired in your place of work, and it increases the risk of legal action. So lots of impact for the the place itself, the business or the university. There's also huge impact on the target of the behavior, both physical and mental health. In the old days, we used to think, what we called somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches, general malaise, not feeling well, that was all psychological. We now know that the actual stress of being the target of cyberbullying and bullying behaviors actually leads to real physical health issues and concerns, and so these are stress reactions and actual physical health issues. It also, we now know that individuals who are targeted don't have low self-esteem to begin with, but it erodes their self-esteem. And so you see a decline in self-esteem over time. It is isolating. People tend to hole up at home and isolate themselves. It leads to a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, high levels of depression and anxiety, need for medication, and in worst case scenarios, suicidal ideation and acts of suicide. Researchers at the University of Manitoba have found that workplace bullying inflicts more harm on employees than sexual harassment. And compared to victims of sexual harassment in the workplace, bullied employees show more job stress, less commitment to the company, and higher levels of anxiety and anger. The other thing that I hadn't really thought about, because I most often work with children, is that it can impact on your family and your relationships. So if you are experiencing a lot of anger and shame at work, that may be displaced at home. You may withdraw emotionally at home as well as at work because you're overwhelmed by your experiences. On the other side, individuals may pretend that things are just fine at home, not want to admit what's happening at work, and their partner or their family may be wondering, what's going on. Lots of fear and anxiety that may come home with you from your place of work. You may even see violence at home, and certainly we see what we call bully victims, individuals who are initially victimized and they get pushed and pushed and pushed until they engage in perpetration of behaviors, or may just have a lot of pent-up anger that comes out in the wrong place at the wrong time. Partners may not understand the severe impact that the behavior is having, which may lead to a lack of empathy and increased loneliness. How to confront workplace bullying? Well, we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes, but just a quick overview. You really need to take care of yourself. You need to learn to recognize what cyberbullying and bullying look like in your workplace. Recognize that you can change your response to those behaviors. Learn how to set boundaries. I know Nancy and I were talking about examples of cyberbullying, and I was saying, well, we shouldn't even be getting to that place where, what do we do when this happens? We should be talking about how to change the work environment so these things are not happening to begin with. If you are being cyberbullied, keep a paper trail, report the incidents, report early, report. I always tell kids that, I tell everyone that. Seek outside support and assistance. Surround yourself with people who can support you. Seek professional help or counseling, and remember that you're not alone. Finally, there is a responsibility for the employer, and I know Robert will speak more to that, but it's really important that the employer promotes a work culture where all types of bullying is not tolerated, where there's a clear written and well-documented policy, and Carleton has one, and we'll talk about that, where there's training for staff and management, and reminding staff that anything that's posted on the internet is out of their control and potentially there forever. I'll remind you all to stop and review an email before you send it and consider the impact it might have. And I think the last thing is really to think about if you are having an issue at work is to really try to avoid having disagreements by email. As I said, you're missing a lot of information when you just go back and forth by email. There's that perceived kind of distance, and so people can be more hurtful and harmful. There's a lack of affective information, and just is not the best way to communicate with each other. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Just a little bit of background in terms of why we're here. Back in 2015, a working group was struck, and this wasn't covered in the student piece because this is relevant specifically to faculty and staff. So a working group was struck we have 8 different unions on campus, and we met, I think, 3 times looking at the best way to communicate information. And this isn't the end, it's really a start of a discussion and a review and promoting awareness and information around cyberbullying. And I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to, there's people beyond who's up on the panel here. So this picks up on something in 2013, which is the workplace harassment and prevention policy that Nancy was instrumental in bringing home. Then we had all of the members of the working group, and I see our union folk here in the room today, so the CUPE, CUASA, and I don't see 910. Is anyone from CUPE 910 here? Art Ullett was on the working group.
4600.
Yep, KB4 Wesley's here. Kevin was in the working group. And so, in looking about for speakers, it was an excellent find to see that we have an expert in-house and one of our own faculty members to help deliver this workshop to the community. And as was pointed out earlier, we started with a student-focused session this morning, and this is focusing on the staff and faculty. What you'll see in the policy reflects some of what Tina was saying this morning in terms of what cyberbullying is. But beyond our own policies, there's the broader criminal law and the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and also the developments in common law. And what is very interesting to me as a lawyer about the common law is that it constantly evolves to address gaps in legislation and or policies. And a perfect example of that is last month, a new tort was created in Ontario. So you may remember a case back in 2012 called the Jones case, and it created the tort of inclusion on seclusion, which is an expanding recognition of privacy rights. And that's been expanded yet again last month with basically a case of essentially revenge porn, where an ex-boyfriend who had convinced his girlfriend to send an intimate video to him, he decided to share it with all his friends and denigrate his ex. That ultimately resulted in a case that was decided. He didn't actually show up to defend himself, so it proceeded by way of default judgment. But the judge didn't find enough in existing law. So there's a saying that says that categories of negligence are never closed, and that the law is always evolving, and this is an example of that. So just last month, Justice Stinson recognized this new tort, and it's called, just for the new tort of public disclosure of private facts. And he basically described the actions of the ex-boyfriend as a form of cyberbullying. And he awarded damages totaling over $50,000 for this act. And he issued a very broad injunction ordering the defendant to destroy all copies of the video in his possession, preventing him from posting the video online or sharing it with others, and from having any contact with the plaintiff or her family. This is, I think, where we're going. So that's, and I preface this, because what I'm covering is when situations don't resolve at the informal stage. And you're going to hear more from Jacques under our policies about the informal stage. And something that Tina said this morning, and I didn't hear you say it in this afternoon, was that most victims of cyberbullying, you don't find them saying, I wish that the perpetrator was punished more. But we have to deal with those situations where, and look at what are the consequences when more corrective, less punitive measures don't work, and when people cross the line, essentially. I'm going to leave the criminal harassment piece for my last slide. So the legal process, the balancing of interests always happens. Here at Carleton, we're in an institution that's dedicated to and recognizes academic freedom. You can walk on campus at any time, and civil disobedience is actually, promoted to a certain extent, because this is a place where norms are challenged, where we get into heated debates and question everything, essentially. That's I remember one of the associate deans I was dealing with, he said, I teach my students to challenge everything, including me. So this is a place that is, fertile ground for debates to escalate and cross the line. So under the policy, and this again picks up on something that Tina said, it clearly delineates the obligation on employees, on supervisors and managers, regardless of whether there's a complaint, to redress situations of harassment that they observe, and also the bystander piece. So witnesses who are aware of it also have a duty to report to the manager. When we can't deal with situations in a less, through alternative measures, so, and Jacques will speak to this in terms of mediation and facilitation, where there's a recognition of wrongdoing and an ability to move correctively, then we'll look at that. But in certain cases, and we'll give you specific examples here. So this is a quote, and just as in the Human Rights Code where it talks about harassment is a course of conduct, in certain instances a single incident can be sufficient. And this is a situation where a employee in the IT area was contacted by a summer student to assist with a golf tournament, and things basically progressed platonically, like they just came from similar hometowns, and they agreed to meet after the summer at some point to go on a hiking trip. And the employee said to the summer student, well, I don't want to introduce you to one of my friends because he always hits on my girlfriends. She was like, She reconsidered whether he got the wrong message. She sent a text. He didn't see it. He shows up. She doesn't. He thinks he stood up, and he sends this message. As you can see, he threatens her career prospects. She was interested in a permanent career with Hydro One, and he said, due to his great influence over HR, being in HR, chuckled at that, but then basically he said, you'll be at Tim Hortons the rest of your life. Hydro One, she went to her union to discuss this because she was concerned. That was brought to the line manager, and the employer responded, essentially saying to the employee that this is unacceptable conduct by an employee. It reflects poorly on Hydro One. You have used your position of influence. You have contacts with all of our user groups in the organization. We can't tolerate this behavior, and the employee was terminated. The union, as is the norm, representing the employee, grieved the dismissal. The parties couldn't resolve it. It went through the grievance steps, and ultimately it landed in front of an arbitrator. I took a straw poll this morning from the students as to what the result was, and I'll do the same here. So, termination case, there's a strong union contingent here. Termination, upheld or not? Those who think it was not upheld? Those who think it would be upheld? Was not upheld. Termination was not upheld because it was a single incident, number one. Number two, the employee throughout the process readily acknowledged, once he was presented with the state of the facts, he immediately apologized that it was an unfiltered. He was candid in his testimony. He self-initiated anger management classes. And the arbitrator, due to the fact that it was a single incident, mitigated the penalty. By the time this case went to arbitration, there was at least a year. So the employee was reinstated, but with no compensation for the period he was off from the date of the termination until the date of the decision. So that was the way that the arbitrator weighed the misconduct versus the impacts. One of the things the next case, though, demonstrates, and it reinforces, again, is something that Tina alerted us to, is in terms of the impacts, though, of cyberbullying and how profound they can be on victims. So unlike a bar situation where you might be an altercation and 5 people hear it, something that ends up on the internet, ends up on Facebook, it's forever, it's to the world, it's never forgotten. And so the consequences can be quite significant, as the next case will show. So this is a Canada Post case, and there was I would describe a supervisor who, again, due to productivity issues, was being hard on the employees, and the employees, reacted. There was a partial suspension of this 3-day suspension of this 31-year employee, and then In conjunction with consumption of alcohol, she went on a Facebook binge, essentially. And she posted, over the course of 14 days, I think it was, 31 very dramatic, graphic, and disturbing comments about her supervisors, including phrases such as "die bitch die." If I wasn't drunk, I would take this voodoo doll of my supervisor into the driveway and run the bitch over. We surprised evil, referring to supervisor evil, by showing up for work. She thought we wouldn't. Wrong again. The B word again. She then actually took a picture of a skeleton, hung it in the lunchroom, and then described it in this way. She said, again referring to her supervisor, "Looks like she lost some weight and go back to hell." Interestingly, the employee herself viewed herself, though, as the victim of bullying because of what she perceived as the harsh treatment of her supervisor. Again, alcohol, going to Facebook, maybe the better course would have been to contact your union to talk about the relationship with the supervisor and address it through management. I see nods from the union. Yeah. But just to understand the employee's perspective here, she also posted, "There's no supervisor today, so we're enjoying the break from the bullying, but the witching hour is 3. And definitely thinking that she was in the right at the time, she said, "I'm talking to the press this afternoon, keep an eye on the news." Of course, that didn't actually happen, or the press didn't pick it up. When this all of these Facebook posts came to light, because no privacy settings, it was public, it was published to the world. When she was confronted about it, her reaction was that her privacy had been invaded and that only her 50 best friends could see. The reaction and the results of this basically public humiliation and disparagement of the supervisors. One of the supervisors had 22 years of perfect attendance and unblemished service, ended up on over 6 weeks of medical leave, required medication, and had to be transferred to a different location and could no longer supervise employees. She was put on projects that were basically process-oriented, where she wouldn't have to actually supervise others. So she became an individual contributor, and another supervisor required 2 weeks of stress leave. Now, in this case, you would be correct if you voted that the termination was upheld. In fact, the apology letter, she didn't actually apologize. She again talked about her privacy being invaded, and then on cross-examination, she didn't help herself when she actually blamed her supervisors for what she posted. So the salient point in her termination letter states, "The intent of your postings were not only to serve as a threat to your team leaders, but also to promote hatred and defiance towards them." And so the case, although it went to full hearing, the arbitrator ultimately upheld the dismissal in that case. Now we come to the culminating case of Robert Campbell in 2015, who is, again, this is Ottawa, getting on the radar. So Mr. Campbell, the trial judge referred to his case as cyberbullying at its highest. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He actually didn't contest the charges at the end of the day. There was more than 30, which included defamatory libel, criminal harassment. And his campaign of harassing others was international. He harassed people in the United States, United Kingdom, and 18 people in Ottawa over the course of 12 years. He presented his targets to the world as child predators and exotic dancers. One of his targets he cast to online colleagues as a sex fiend whose daughters worked as prostitutes when they weren't organizing for the Nazi Party. the father interviewed later said he was actually looking to basically uproot his family and relocate out of Ottawa because of the humiliation and embarrassment that was caused to the family. This gentleman worked in the IT field, and he used something called Tor, which is an acronym for something called the Onion Router, which is a software that's designed to protect the privacy of users, but ultimately was misused by this gentleman. And the RCMP, though, were able to still trace back to their source. Although, as you can see, this gentleman was able to carry on his campaign for 12 years before he was ultimately caught. Again, Justice Alder in Ottawa said this is cyberbullying at its highest. Sorry, there was 60 crimes in total that he pleaded guilty to. Again, his situation was a case of obsessive compulsive disorder, and he started his online campaign the day he quit his job at a software firm. And his only, what he said to the newspaper media at the end was, "I became desensitized to what I was doing, and I crossed the line." And he apologized to all his victims, but that damage is permanent. Which is all the more reason to say that it's very important that we are all aware, as Tina pointed out, to intervene in these situations early. We have here, not just at the panel, but I'd just like to point out that on the working group, for example, we have equity, we have Department of Safety, our Assistant Privacy Officer is here, ITS, and I forget what the program is called, so I'm going to actually single you out. Isn't there also, if someone is actually the victim of, believes that they're the victim, that ITS has protocols in place to help shut down?
There's the harassment policy
through yeah.
safety and ITS.
Yeah, and if we didn't mention it at the outset, there is actually a resource sheet at the entrance for you to take away that has a list of contacts. And again, early intervention is the best method, so we don't end up in these much more drastic situations. I agree completely with the quote that Tina set out. I think it was the professor from McMaster that said that it starts small, and then it escalates, and it doesn't get better with time. So, but we're going to end on a better news foot, I think, with Jacques talking about our informal processes under our workplace harassment prevention program. Thanks.
Before I start talking about the process, there's a Appendix B in the Workplace Harassment Prevention Program. That basically, you can use this as a guideline to determine who you should be speaking with if something ever happens. So it's just a guideline, like I mentioned, but it's pretty accurate. So I would recommend that if you ever have a chance to go and have a look at the policy, you'll find it in Appendix B. What I'm going to try to do today is basically demystify the harassment process. Looks a bit complicated, but actually it's not all that complicated. So this diagram here, if you look at the center portion, basically it indicates that the complainant reports the incident to the manager supervisor to the next level if appropriate. So basically, HR, this is the process that HR follows. We also work closely with safety and equity, and we have to determine from the get-go basically where the complaint is going to go. So before I get into the whole process for HR, I'm going to ask two of the experts at the front to just basically explain the process in their department very quickly. So it gives you, at least it gives you an idea, another perspective from the other departments that also deal with bullying and cyberbullying and so on and so forth. Richard, want to come up first, or?
Good morning. My name is, or afternoon, I guess now, Richard Cyberbullying with the Safety Department, for those of you who I don't know already. Really quickly, our process is essentially whether it's online harassment, in-person harassment, whether it's student rights, whether it's an HR issue. We don't really expect you to know what the outcome is going to be when you come in to see us. Our staff will sit down. They'll consult with you. They'll sort of walk you through what options you might have. So I think we've talked about, it can be handled through HR if it's an employee issue. This morning we talked a lot about student rights and responsibilities. So if it involves students, it can go that avenue. If the person lives in residence, it can be dealt with under a residence contract. And then there's also the outside options that you have, which are criminal or civil cases as well. So we'll sit down, we'll have a conversation with people about where it's going to fall into there, where they would like to take it. It's complainant driven for the most part, unless there's a piece in there that identifies it to us as that there might be a higher risk to the rest of the community. So we very much want the person who's being harassed to have a say in how they want to deal with it. And then we'll talk about safety planning. So if there's threats of physical abuse or violence in there, we'll talk about strategies to deal with that. We'll consult with the police if that's the avenue that you want to go. HR, housing, and all those other departments. So we work on a lot of referrals and sharing information that way. But that'll all be dependent on and discussed with the person who puts the complaint in first. So. Primarily, most of the cases that we handle on our own or investigate are either those that fall into sort of the criminal realm where we'll work with the police or students. Most of the other stuff is dealt with by HR if it has to deal with faculty or staff. So that's it.
One of the things that we do is that when you come in there, you have confidentiality. A lot of people, especially staff, will come onto our office and will walk through what is happening. And in that case, if we think it is definitely a human HR issue, that's where we will send them. Often they'll ask us to kind of be the middle people to kind of work that through so that it is a little easier for them. If it's a student issue, the same as Richard, we will work with student affairs. The fact that they can come to us and have that confidentiality allows a level of look at all the options without sort of committing. And once they know what the options are, it's easier for them to choose the language, because that's part of it. How do I tell somebody? Who's going to believe me? Am I going, is it a safe place for me to go? So those are the pieces that we can work with. And in most cases, unless it's a human rights issue, we will deal with it. If it's not, then it'll be the other offices that will go through. So we have the informal and the formal process both working together.
As you can see, there's a lot of working together when it comes to complaints. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the process. There's one area that I really want to spend some time on, and that is basically the informal process, where I'll be talking about coaching, facilitation, mediation, and that kind of thing. So basically what happens is that when a complaint comes in, like Smita and Richard indicated, we'll try to figure out exactly where the complaint needs to go. Once we know that, then we'll try to determine exactly what needs to be done. So we'll listen, we'll try to figure out exactly what's happening, and so on and so forth. If we think that basically facilitation or mediation or coaching can be offered at that point during the informal investigation, then we'll do so. The informal investigation basically is we're looking at the situation internally. Once we know basically what all the issues are all about, and we'll be able to determine if we'll offer coaching, facilitation, or mediation, and we'll explain to the people, to the complainant, basically what it's all about, what it entails, and so on and so forth. There are different ways that we can do it. We can do it all together in one room. We could do it separately. We can do coaching. Coaching, basically, what happens is that we'll be coaching the person on how to approach the other person without the other person even knowing about it. So we can work in the background, like we can work in the foreground. It doesn't really matter to us. It all depends on what the complainant is comfortable with. With regards to facilitation mediation, basically we'll sit down in a room, the 3-4 of us, depending on how many people are involved. So we'll have the complainant and the respondent and so on and so forth. And quite often what happens is that the complainant is looking quite often for a reason and a safe place to explain their feelings, how they felt when they received, let's say in this case, we're talking about cyberbullying. So with regards to an email that they receive or what have you, and they're looking basically to have an apology face-to-face. Because quite often people feel that getting an apology in writing is not as good as an apology face-to-face. So they want to make sure that they'll be able to express that and receive that, from the person that did cyberbully or harassed them or what have you. The whole process is like Robert mentioned earlier, this is all basically trying to develop various ways of dealing with situations where you don't have to go through a formal process. A formal process can get very lengthy. It's also very expensive in many of the cases. And quite often you basically don't get the results as quickly as you may be able to get the situation resolved through the informal process. Having said that, there are situations where you don't have a choice, you have to go through the formal process. But to give you an idea with regards to the informal process, in the last 2 years, we've noticed that basically for, let's say, every 9 cases that we get, we usually get 8 informal and 1 formal. A lot of people in the last couple of years are starting to be familiar with the informal process, and they seem to want to go that direction. When I ask people basically, their preference, they tell me basically that they want to go that route, and because they want to get personal satisfaction. They want to face the person that, harassed them or bullied them. So it's about an 8-to-1 ratio, and that started changing about 2 years ago, which is very encouraging, because what happens is that also you have people that are coming in and they're saying, well, this is how I feel, this is what's happening, and so on and so forth. And I want to do something about it. I don't want somebody else to do it for me. I want to take action. I want to be part of the solution and resolving this situation. So when you look at it from that point of view, basically it shows that people are interested in fixing the problem before it goes further. And that is very, very interesting too. It's really encouraging, and has been very encouraging for the last 2 years. So, basically people want to fix it. And we see it more and more now.
I received actually 2 questions that came in to my email. I was wondering if anyone else from the floor had any, but I'll read these out. When does disagreeing with someone on social media cross the line into cyberbullying? I'll turn it over to our panel for response.
Tina, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, I think that as Robert mentioned, and as I read in the literature, certainly academia is a place where people like to debate and like to disagree, and we're trained to be critical and to analyze ideas. I think that it crosses the line when we move from disagreeing in terms of our thoughts and ideas to where the disagreement is now with the intent to cause harm to the other person. So you can certainly disagree with someone without being hurtful or harmful towards them. And so when it becomes personal, I think that's when it becomes crossing the line. Do you want to, Rob?
Yep, I would echo that. I think there's a wide and a rich diversity at Carleton, and I expect, and we see that on a regular basis, that people are passionate in their views and how they express those views, and that's all to be welcomed and in fact supported. But where people cross the line and they begin to disparage other people on their personal characteristics, for example, and they move from attacking an argument or criticizing an argument to attacking personally the proponent of that argument, that in my view is when the line gets crossed, and that's when you move away from a respectful working environment to a disrespectful one.
Thank you. And the other question I have is one that came in at the earlier session this morning. How do we fix the troll program on social media? And another one just came in as well.
Well, Jen was here this morning. She had a really good answer for addressing the troll problem in social media. I think that, as she pointed out, that there are supports in place if you feel that you are being trolled, and that's problematic for you. In general, with social media, a lot of what's happening out there is people are looking for validation and support, and so the less attention paid, and I think that's really important to really focus on not transmitting stuff that is not, that is negative or has a negative intent.
Echoing that, though, and this, the popular phrase in terms of "don't feed the trolls," right?
Yeah.
So they're looking for, any kind of reaction is actually a form of they're getting a response,
That's
right? But I think you said this earlier, though, Tina. Don't just delete it.
That's
Probably
right.
document it, track it, and then at a certain point when it's art, not science. I think you need to speak to your manager, and maybe we'll talk with ITS, talk with HR, maybe involve safety, because as was demonstrated in the case that I showed you, the criminal case, there may be trolls who actually cross over into criminal harassment, identity theft, and these sorts of things. And so even though they may think they're anonymous, there's ways of tracking them. And so in the more serious cases, ultimately, that's the way we'd go.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate that is if you are being targeted, sometimes people's instinct is to just get rid of it, to just delete it, and you really should keep a paper trail.
Thank you. One last one that just came in, I thought was quite interesting. Is it cyberbullying if the person becomes aware of a private email that they were never meant to see?
That was the defense of the Canada Post employee, and I didn't realize I had put privacy settings on. So I don't think a general answer would. We'd have to basically examine the facts and circumstances of each case. There are, just as we protect privacy and freedom of expression, each case has to be weighed on its own facts and circumstances. So if somebody's account was hacked, for example, and there was a private email exchange was lifted, and then that became public through through a third party, then I think we would have to take that differently than somebody basically going on a hate campaign and sending hate mail about a supervisor to 50 of their closest friends.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's always about the intent. Is there an intent to cause harm? So was a picture transmitted with the intent to cause harm to the individual, or was it accidentally sent to you? I always have to check really carefully, because sometimes I text and I think I'm texting to someone, and then I realize, oh no, I sent that to the wrong person. So I think that's the important piece, is if the intent is to cause harm. And I know when I work with youth and teens, and they're always like, well, I shouldn't have to be friends with everyone. And I'm like, you don't have to be friends with everyone, but it's not okay to be hurtful or harmful to anyone. So I think if you you know, if you got that by mistake, of course, the thing you're not going to do is send this on to your friend saying, hey, look what I got by mistake, because then you are part of the problem.
That reminds me, Tina, autofill on my Outlook has slammed me a couple of
I
times.
know, I've had that happen too.
We have a question.
Andrea, you have a question?
Is there an expectation of privacy if it's being sent from a work email?
If there is some workplace policies differ than others, so there should be a clear workplace policy on, because, for example, here at Carleton, there's a personal expense account that's used to buy computers. In the government, there is some arbitration decisions that talks about an expectation of privacy. There is a case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada, though, involving a situation where a worker brought in their computer for maintenance, and because it was functioning too slowly, and that's because there was like, I don't know, a terabyte of information on there that shouldn't have been on there, including pictures of the women's or the girls' locker room at the school and so forth. And so ultimately that person was discharged. There was different aspects of that case in terms of whether there was a valid search and seizure and a breach of the charter. But the court speaks very clearly in terms of if it's work equipment and there's a clear policy that says you don't have an expectation of privacy, then there isn't one.
And I think in general, and because most of the cyberbullying issues revolve around email, is you should always work from the premise that email is not private.
Yeah.
As soon as you send an email to anyone, it is not private anymore because they can do anything they want with it.
And here at Carleton, when you log on every day, there's an acknowledgement of the acceptable use policy here at Carleton.
Any other questions? If there's no other questions, we're at 3 o'clock. I'd like to ask you to congratulate and thank our panels here for this. And I also, by that same time, please applaud yourself and thank all of you for being here. And for all of you on your way out, I'd like to make sure that everyone is carrying these very fashionable respect and safety buttons. So thank you, everybody.